Good afternoon. My name is Louis Zook, a retired law enforcement officer and now a police safety consultant with Safe Risk Loss Control Services working with the League of Municipalities. I have the privilege today of serving as the moderator for the public safety panel for the League of Municipalities at Advocacy Day. Our panel is comprised of three respected professional leaders in Alabama law enforcement who are here to share their thoughts on the state of law enforcement and, most importantly, how each of you as elected officials can work within your own communities and with the legislature to improve public safety for us all. I have a limited amount of time, so let me start with brief introductions of our panel and then we'll move into the discussion. Coming from your right, we have Chief Bill Partridge, who is the Chief of Police and Director of Public Safety for the City of Oxford. Chief Partridge has held every rank in the police department except for Assistant Chief since beginning his service to the citizens of Oxford in 1989. He is a recognized expert in the field of law enforcement technology and is an instructor in police media relations, crisis communications, and officer-involved shooting investigations. Chief Partridge serves on numerous boards in the field of law enforcement and public safety, to include Vice Chairman of the Alabama Peace Officers Standard and Training Commission. He is a past two-term president of the Alabama Association of Chiefs of Police and the current chairman of their legislative committee. He also serves as the current vice president of the FBI National Academy Associates Alabama chapter and serves as the advisory board chairman for the Center for Best Practices in Law Enforcement at Jacksonville State University. He attended Jacksonville State University and the University of North Florida's Institute of Police Technology and Management and holds a graduate certificate in criminal justice from the University of Virginia. He is also a graduate of the 225th session of the FBI National Academy and a certified law enforcement executive by the Alabama Peace Officers Standard and Training Commission. Next is David Wilson, who is the Executive Director of Public Safety for the City of Foley. And currently assists the police, fire, and city emergency management departments. After serving 2 years in the Alabama National Guard, he served nearly 8 years as a military policeman and criminal investigator in the United States Air Force. After his service, he began his public law enforcement career with the San Angelo, Texas Police Department as a police officer. In 1990, he returned home to Alabama and began working at the Daphne Police Department, where he progressed through the ranks from patrol officer to captain. And after 16 years in Daphne, Wilson was appointed Chief of Police of the Foley Police Department, where he served for 13 years, retired in 2020, only to return a year later as Foley's first Executive Director of Public Safety. Director Wilson is a graduate of the 200th session of the FBI National Academy and is a certified law enforcement executive by the Alabama Peace Officers Standard and Training Commission. He serves as a regular instructor at the Alabama New Police Chiefs Development Seminar, FBI Southeastern Law Enforcement Executive Development Seminar, and the Alabama Public Safety Leadership Academy. Our last panelist is Shane Ware, who is the Chief of Police for the City of Vestavia Hills. He has a distinguished career spanning 28 years in law enforcement, beginning as a police officer with the City of Bessemer in 1996. He moved to Vestavia Hills Police Department in February of 2000 and steadily progressed through the ranks before being appointed as their chief in 2023. Chief Ware commands a department of 110 sworn officers and 3 civilians. He received a master's degree in Justice Administration from Faulkner University, a Bachelor of Arts in Business Administration from Birmingham Southern College, along with numerous law enforcement-related certifications. He is also a graduate of the 276th session of the FBI National Academy and a certified law enforcement executive by the Alabama Peace Officers Standard and Training Commission. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for your participation today. So the one thing that's always constant is change. And there's been a lot of change in public safety, and particularly in law enforcement, in the last several years. So we'd like to start our discussion, and we'll just throw it open to the panel to talk about a little bit about how public safety has changed in the last 10 years.
Well, I would say the biggest thing that's happened in public safety over the last 10 years is the scrutiny that the officers on the street receive every day. I hear it from different classes that I teach across the country. Officers talking about, you know, we're scared that we're going to mess up because we're scared we're going to be the next YouTube sensation for 15 seconds. So one of the things that I want to talk about too is that change, along with the changes of our laws, the changes of a lot of different things over the last decade. But we have I was glad to hear that the speaker was talking about the mental health issues in the state. That's the number one issue that we deal with on a daily basis is mental health. And I'm glad to see that the state is addressing those. It seems as if all of the mental health has been pushed off on the street officer to deal with. They're not only a law enforcement officer or a peace officer, they're also having to be a psychiatrist basically on the street. They're having to be a counselor. They're having to take all this on. And when you do this and the type of scrutiny that they're under every day, you tend to see stresses in our profession, and you see officers leaving it to go find another job that pays better, that they don't have to have this type of stressors every day. One of the things when I talk about stressors is officers will see within a year more traumatic events than the normal person will see in a lifetime. So we have to make sure that we provide them with the mental health to make sure that they are okay to be out on the street. But law enforcement itself changes rapidly, especially with technology, different procedures, so you have to stay up on top of that. But that's just a few things, and I'll let Director Wilson talk about some of those.
And to your point, Chief, not only do our police officers have a hard time with the mental ill in the streets, at some point, it eventually, of course not everybody, but there's quite a few that end up doing something that they end up being put in jail. And it's shameful that a lot of our mental consumers are in our jails. It's shameful. And that it takes its toll on our correction officers as well, what they have to, I see heads shaking in here when I say that, what they have to go through when they're trying to provide care and custody of regular inmates, much less mental health. The other thing I wanted to point out it has to do with, you'll hear us probably talk about this, all three of us, recruitment and retention. Y'all have already heard that term from the previous panel, where if we advertised that we were hiring, we used to have 110 show up. Now we have 10. 10. And I'm not exaggerating, 10. And an agency that I was talking with last week, of those 10 that showed up, and that's usual, of those 10 that showed up, 8 were eliminated first couple of hours. Not no, but heck no, are you 8 gonna be wearing our badge? And there's some other places you can go apply, but no, I'm kidding. But no, if you don't lower your standards, you should not lower your standards. And I specifically want to ask the mayors to do whatever you can to help your police department not lower the standards. And of those 10, 8 were eliminated right away. And this particular chief told me, and these remaining 2 are not very impressive at all. And so then you start over. So those are 2 of the biggest changes.
Just to reiterate some of the topics that have been previously mentioned, recruiting and retention. 29 years ago, my first job as a police officer was with the city of Bessemer, and I competed with about 2,500 people to get my job. And you said just a moment ago that now when we apply or announce that we have a vacancy, 10 people show up. The numbers are no longer sustaining themselves and replacing us as we age out of the profession. In 10 years, we've experienced bond reform in our jails. We've experienced prison reform throughout the state. We have more criminals on the street than we did when I started in the 90s. Back when I started, y'all remember habitual offenders laws. Those are gone. We have seen many effects now that we have experienced a 10-year mark or removal from the Ferguson incident many years ago, and that's affected recruiting and retention. Do y'all remember in 2013 when we tried to manipulate the retirement system and do away with Tier 1 retirement for our police officers and firefighters? That was a horrible mistake, and it took us several years to correct that. We now have Tier 3 retirement because of that, because many of our law enforcement and firefighting leadership at the time realized that that was a horrible mistake, and we had to correct that issue. Mental health, greatest challenge that we deal with every day as police officers. We are not the best equipped at dealing with it, but we do the best that we can to mitigate these circumstances. Just while I was traveling to this conference that we are attending in another ballroom, one of my officers had to interact with a mentally ill person, and it was the family knew this person was mentally ill. They knew that he was not on his medications, and they knew he was walking around with a pistol in his pocket. Yet we are expected to make these quick, life-altering decisions in the field, and we are the most ill-equipped to deal with mental illness. And everybody had an opportunity to deal with this person's mental illness long before it manifested in a law enforcement interaction, and they failed to do so. What other issues in 10 years have we seen change?
One thing I wanted to comment when you said a juvenile with a gun, just that. Years ago, we could take a juvenile and lock them up, and they would go to juvenile detention. And I'll never forget hearing and these are juvenile probation officers, these are juvenile authorities that care for these kids like we do. And I'll never forget, I was taking a kid in for something, and something they had done that was bad, and I remember the juvenile authority looking at me and saying, this kid is fixing to feel the immediate consequences of what they did. They're going to feel the immediate consequences of what they did, and they're going to take the ride to Bay Minette Juvenile Detention Facility. That worked for us for years, because a lot of times just that ride, that handcuffed ride, and processing into a juvenile detention facility, and then we let them out before the 72-hour requirement had arrived, it made a world of difference in turning these kids' lives around quite a bit. Now, it is so much harder to do that than it used to be, and that doesn't match our handling of them. Our prohibitions doesn't match the increase in crime we're seeing from these kids. And I say kids are young adults, and they're shooting each other, and that's everywhere.
And let me say one thing about that, the juvenile crime in our state, especially the violent crime. As you're aware, the governor has put out a Safe Alabama package of public safety bills, and one of those is the Glock switch. Most of you are probably familiar with the Glock switch. If you're not, it's just a switch that goes on a weapon that turns it into an automatic weapon. And you can't control that. Well, the federal government has a federal law that bans Glock switches. But the problem is, when we try to federalize the arrest and send it to federal court, we can't do that with juveniles, because the federal government does not deal with juveniles. That's not in their purview. So we have to have this bill here in the state of Alabama to be able to sentence these juveniles who are going out here and committing heinous crimes with Glock switches and other automatic weapons, so we can get them behind bars. Also, to touch on the standards part of it, is being on the Peace Officer Standards and Commission, we see way too many people that are coming before the commission as law enforcement officers who should have never been one to begin with because of their background. And we're having to revoke their certificates or their certifications and get them out of law enforcement. We cannot, as a state, lower our law enforcement standards. When we lower our standards, we put our community at risk, we put our department at risk, we put our community at risk, and we cannot do that. So I understand, and I hear from chiefs all the time talking about how hard it is to find candidates to be a police officer. But we cannot, as a profession, just hire somebody and put a blue uniform on them and expect them to go out and be excellent in what they do, okay? So we cannot lower our standards. We just cannot do it.
Thank y'all very much. Some very important, noteworthy comments and topics. And along those same lines, touching on either those topics or some others that may come to mind, what are you specifically doing within your department that may address some of those challenges that you're facing?
Well, we've got a pretty good mayor. He's here, Ralph Helmick, somewhere back there. Let me say this, I retired and came back. I'm not sucking up. I can retire again anytime. So I'm being for real. Was that pretty good, Mayor? I think he was hooting and hollering back there. He said he wasn't going to do that. But no, some of the things that we've done, Baldwin County as a whole, we have our SROs paid for by the Board of Education in all cities. The SROs are paid for. Every public school has an SRO in it. Sometimes some more than one, but based on the population of the school. That's a big deal because these police officers are in the schools, number one, for safety, and secondly, they're making contact with these kids every day and role model and that kind of thing. The other thing that actually our mayor was pushing pretty hard for, and we got it completed and just started, is a law enforcement career path in the high school that's being taught by one of our police officers to the kids that may have an interest in law enforcement. And that's a big deal as far as interaction with the kids and a possible pathway for law enforcement starting with the kids when they're younger. And that may, they have a first choice night. I'm mispronouncing that, but they have choice nights at middle school and at the high school where they're voicing what they want their careers to be. That's good stuff. Force multipliers we're hurting on cops like everybody else. So we're using technology a lot. If your police chiefs come to you for cameras, I would listen to them. License plate readers, I'd listen to them. We've got to have, we're using a lot more technology to help us because we're hurting on cops everywhere. And what we refer to as force multipliers, we've started a program at Foley, support services technicians. I'd have killed for this when I was a 19-year-old kid, but we're hiring young folks. They're not cops, but they're support services technicians, and they have a uniform and they drive city vehicles. They are a city employee, but they're not cops. They're not identified as cops, but they're out here directing traffic. They're out here to get stranded motors. They're all these service aspects that the police department is known to do and will do. We have these guys these men and women helping us to free up the police officers for the actual other calls for service.
And let me say something about technology. Technology is extremely important in the day we live in, okay? I have mayors and council members from across the country who will ask about camera systems and LPR systems and so forth. That camera on that pole does not use workers' compensation, doesn't take vacations, doesn't call in sick, doesn't get the flu. It's 24/7. There's nobody just sitting there watching that camera, but just say there's a robbery down the street. It gives your investigators key evidence to be able to show who that person was and where he was. So the technology aspect certainly is helping with the recruiting part of it because we can't get enough people, but we can implement technology to help take some of that load off of your investigators and your officers on the street. That is huge. And you see that happening more and more across our country. You're seeing more and more real-time crime centers pop up across our country. We've got about 5 in the state of Alabama now, and I think one's being considered. There's many things that we can do to help our people on the street take some of that stress of, law enforcement needs to be proactive, okay? Not reactive. And the problem we have right now with the lack of personnel is we're only being able to be reactive. And as long as we're reactive, we're never going to get a good grip on what's going on in our community crime-wise. We have got to take care of the little things in order for the big things to go away. And we don't have the personnel and the time to be able to take care of those little things. So you would be surprised at your men and women who are working the streets on a daily basis think when a council member or a mayor walks up to them and says, hey, I just want to tell you thank you for what you do. Believe it or not, that means more to them than anything. And we've got to support those men and women on the street. Because only imagine for 10 minutes, if those men and women are not standing on that line every day, where our community would be in just a matter of hours. And we've got to back them.
Bill's cameras flash blue lights. And so when I visit Oxford, I'm very aware, and I'm there for good reasons. When I come into Oxford, I see all these blue lights looking at me, and I know I'm under view. Much less a criminal coming in your city, in that city, knows he's under view too, and they need to go somewhere else. So it's a big deal.
These are some great topics that they're talking about, but I feel very blessed that I work for a city that has not suffered so greatly from the inability to staff police officers. I'm currently allocated 110 sworn officers, and we are staffed at 109 today. So we're very blessed, but how did we become blessed? Well, I have a mayor, a council, and a city manager that absolutely believe in having strong law enforcement and public safety. And they back those words up, those thoughts up with supplying us with the proper salaries, equipment, training, and so forth that we need to do our job. We realized years ago that we had to go to a one-to-one vehicle initiative in order to to attract and retain police officers. The one-to-one initiative means that police car that new officer is getting is over $85,000 per unit. When we hire a new officer, it is over $15,000 in equipment and uniforms that has to be purchased for that person. Public safety is not cheap, but we have to invest this in our people if we want to keep them. We have to send them to the best quality training that we can afford to send them to, because if I don't do it, another agency will, and I'll lose my officer to that other agency. We have to invest in their salaries. We have to compensate them with every conceivable premium that we are allowed in our system to pay them with. And that's the only way we're going to retain them and keep them from going to another agency. An officer right now that is in good standing is a very valuable commodity, and they can go anywhere in the state if their record is clean. And we've got to be doing everything that we can from a city and a leadership side to make sure that I'm giving them everything they want to stay with me. That does not mean that I placate to them. That does not mean that they're not held accountable. That does not mean that we don't have discipline and enforce rules. But I have to treat them fairly and provide them with what they need to do their job, or they're going to go down the road somewhere else.
You know, one of the things that we hear agencies talk about is the cost of training our officers. Now, yes, we're going to send them to the best possible training that we can send them to make them a better law enforcement officer. And people say, well, why are you going to spend that much money on them if they leave, or if they were to leave? Well, I have the question to come back to you and say, what if they stay? We've got to invest in them. Training is huge. These officers have to be trained. They have to know what they're doing when they're on the street, and we have to hold them accountable. I'll say this, and I say this a lot. You show me a successful police department, and I'll show you a successful city.
Watch out.
And vice versa. Okay?
Thank you very much. So in addition to the things that you just shared, are there any other best practices or programs that maybe you are aware of from other communities across the state that may be of interest?
Well, I think number one is community involvement. The officers have to be in the community. They have to know their community, okay? They need to know who the community leaders are in their community. I tell my officers all the time, if you're riding through a neighborhood, you're riding through downtown, you're not doing your job if those windows are up. Let the windows down. If you see somebody out on the sidewalk, if you see somebody cutting grass or working in the yard, get out and speak to them. Community engagement. We do over 260 events a year just inside the city of Oxford, because we want to be woven into the fabric of our community. We want our people to know our officers and our officers to know our people. You'll be surprised how much that helps, but it also helps us because people are more willing to tell us if someone's doing something criminally wrong. They feel more comfortable with that. So, of course, we use Coffee with a Cop. We use all types of different programs to make sure that we're out there with the community where they feel comfortable talking to our people.
And I use the same terminology. Community policing is the very fabric of being a police officer. You can't be a police officer like you need to be without that. And same thing, community engagement is not driving through a neighborhood in the summer. I know it's hot, but with your windows rolled up and waving, it's stop. And we call it stop, park, walk, and talk. And you get out and you engage the community. So you have to have that to be a modern, effective, proficient community policing department.
I think it's also very important to think about the fact when we're talking about retaining officers and we're talking about community involvement, if you're constantly turning your officers over because they're not there long enough to become engaged with the community, then that end result never occurs because the officers are never there long enough for the community to get to know them or vice versa. So that's another reason that it's important to try to do those things that you can within your own community to support the officers and to retain those good officers that you want to retain.
And investing in those good officers save you money because you're not constantly sending people through the academy process and you're having to constantly rebuild your force because you have people leaving. If you'll just invest in the good ones you have, you'll find that it'll save you money over time.
Thank you. So there's probably not many opportunities that these chiefs collectively or even individually get to speak to this number of elected officials at one time. So we're going to provide them with an opportunity to maybe share with you what they believe and what they think that as local leaders, something that you can do to help change the narrative, to improve public safety, not only in your local communities, but across the state as well.
Okay. One of the most important things that each of you as city leaders can do to help public safety and honestly the rest of the city is just to do whatever you can to create a positive climate working environment within your organization. This starts at the mayors and the city managers and works its way down to the department heads and throughout the departments. And it's just very important. Everything seems to center in Vestavia Hills about the culture, the climate that we are creating from the city manager down through the bottom ranks of my department. And it's paramount that we keep that going in the right direction at all times. Support, support, support. Whatever you can do to support public safety, we've got to continue to do that. We've got to have strong police and fire departments or we're not going to be strong, healthy, robust cities. A moment ago you were speaking about school resource officers, and we too are fortunate enough that we maintain a 1-to-1 plus ratio in every public school. And those SROs every day, they interact with sometimes 3,000 to 5,000 people daily, counting their students, their teachers, and their parents twice a day. So we've got to have the right people doing that are doing that for the right reasons, that truly believe in a service orientation and community service. Yes, we're law enforcement officers and we're police officers, and we must fight evil and crime. That's absolutely critical. But we've also got to be there to serve the public every day and have the right mindset to do that. And We've got to pick the right people. We've got to never lower our hiring standards. Let me repeat that. Never lower your hiring standards. Run short if you have to, pay overtime if you have to, until we find the right candidates. You know, a lot has changed in hiring in the state of Alabama in the last 4 years. In 2021, we had a new law that affected the way we hire police officers, and it's been tough for us to adjust to it, but it's the best thing that could have ever happened. We've got to have people that are doing this with the right mental faculties, that are doing it for the right reasons, whose backgrounds have been vetted to every degree possible by us, and we got to ensure that they're, again, just doing the right thing for the right reasons. And as city leaders, I also think you need to try to do everything you can to consult your public safety people before making decisions that could impact them in a negative way. We've got to communicate, stay strong, and working on legislation together that could affect us, and get the opinion of the rank and file, see what they say. You know, we've passed some laws in the last few years that have had, in my opinion, a negative impact on public safety. I may be a Second Amendment supporter, but what was wrong with a pistol permit to have a gun? I mean, again, I am a Second Amendment person, but the carrying concealed charge that we used for years prevented homicides and other crimes. And we don't have that tool as strongly as we once did, and I may have opened a political landmine by saying that, but just again, consult your police and fire officials before engaging in legislation that affect public safety.
Thank you. And let me say it like this. The more burglar bars that go up on your windows in your city, the less you will progress as a city. You can actually start going backwards. You start losing your police department, you will start losing parts of your city and then big chunks of your city, and you don't want to go that route. So you've got to support your police department. They're out there working some crazy hours and seeing some crazy stuff. That's part of their job, but they need your support. And on the recruitment and retention, I want to break it down like this. If you do part of it, not all of it, you still have a problem, because if you start out with well, you need to look at a pay study, or you need to get your pay competitive in your area. And once you do that, if you get your starting pay up, and you got them coming in the front door, but because these new people hadn't even been here with us during our hard times, are now making too close to what we've been making because we've been here with you for a while, that's called compression. It's aggravating to try to figure out. I've never seen compression fully worked out, but you can do the best you can. And in our city, we did a retention bonus for those folks that were feeling that squeeze, because it doesn't help if you've got them coming in the front door, new to your city, and you got your senior ones going out the back door because the pay is not right. So that's one of the biggest things I want to push is getting your pay right for your people.
Absolutely, Chief. The biggest thing that I just want to say is don't lower your standards. Act 21268 back in 2021 was passed by the legislature that requires police departments to do certain things like background checks, psychological reviews, credit checks, thorough background investigations. There's a list there that you have to go by. So hopefully we can get the right people. And with the new database, law enforcement database called Radius, now officers who what we used to call gypsy police, who would go and stay 9 months at one agency and jump to another agency, to another agency, to another agency, it gives us an opportunity to check that database and see what type of people we're hiring. So the legislature has done some good things for us over the last several years. And with the governor's Alabama Safe package that the Speaker and the Senate Pro Tem was talking about is going to be huge to help us hopefully lower some of this violent crime. But the biggest thing is we can't just put somebody on the street just to be putting somebody on the street.
And to your point, over the years, you know, occasionally I have to fire an officer, and he needed firing. He don't need to be wearing a badge. And I took care of it. I did my job. You're not going to be a police officer here. You're fired. And going through the channels and all that, legally and all that. And then I see him surface elsewhere with a new uniform on and in a different police car. And I'm sitting there going, Chief, you couldn't have picked up the phone and called me? You're going to learn today.
Well,
you're going to learn in a couple of days that was a mistake. And what Bill's talking about, we got him froze up in the computer. You're not going anywhere. And that's a good thing.
that's right. The radius database helps us stop that in its tracks and not hire bad police officers. They have been police officers somewhere else and were terminated because of a criminal act or because they were under investigation. So that's helping clean that up.
Famous words from David Wilson, you're going to learn today. So obviously there's a lot of critical points that need to be considered for each of you in your own communities, and I would certainly stamp that as forcefully as I possibly could. And I also think, and the panel touched on this, I think it's also just as critical for each one of you to engage with one another, other council members, other mayors in your county, in your region, and also, as they spoke, with your public safety personnel. We need to get on the same page with one another if we're ever going to get to where we're trying to get to. And that also includes, as you're here today in Montgomery, that also includes your local legislature. You have a lot of sway with them, whether you think you do or not. They are elected by you, they are elected to represent you, and they will listen to you if you will take the time to bend their ear a little bit about those issues that are important to you. So, moving on from that, now last week the governor proposed the Safe Alabama legislative package, and you've heard a little bit about that already. But this package, which has bipartisan support, was designed to not only combat violent crime and throughout communities across the state, but also to support and enhance law enforcement's ability to do their job each and every day. Obviously, there'll be some other bills that have been filed that aren't part of that package, and there will be more to come. Every law enforcement bill is not necessarily supportive of law enforcement or supportive of communities, so it's very important that you pay attention to those bills as they're, whether you find out through some local source or through the media or talking with your police chief or whoever the case may be, find out more about that legislation and find out what is important to law enforcement and how you can support it by working with your local legislators. So what I want to do now is just give the panel some time to kind of touch on some highlights of some of the bills that are primarily through the governor's package, but also some others that have already been filed, just to kind of give you an idea of what is out there. And obviously some, as I mentioned, some of these have some significant problems with them or could create significant problems for law enforcement. So if the panel will indulge me, let's just start with, I think the governor called it the Back the Blue package, but I think it's more commonly known in the legislature right now as the Police Officer Immunity Bill. If you could touch on that and kind of let the audience know what that bill is designed to do.
Well, it's HB 202.
That's right.
I believe it's HB 202. HB 202, basically, I know people hear the word immunity and they immediately go, well, nobody should have immunity. But it's not just immunity, it's qualified immunity. And what qualified immunity means is if the police officer is on the street, he's abiding by his policies and procedures, he's abiding by state law, he's abiding by federal law, and he's abiding by the Constitution of Alabama and the United States, then he should be immune from frivolous prosecution and frivolous lawsuits. That's a no-brainer. Because if the police, and this is one of the things that I hear from young officers, is they don't feel like they get enough backing when it comes to that type of thing, because they can go out here and somebody can create a frivolous civil lawsuit and tie them up in court for years. Now, you tell me a 21-year-old has 3 children, small children at home, who's making $50,000 a year as a street officer, and he doesn't have any type of qualified immunity, and he gets out on the street and he gets tied up in a lawsuit, and for some reason he loses it and loses everything he owns. Why would we want to do that? How are you going to get people to actually go out here and do the job? So this bill deals with qualified immunity from civil and criminal prosecution. We have seen some criminal prosecutions across the state should never been brought. And one of the things that the governor wanted to touch on was those 2 things, and they're still working some of those things out. But qualified immunity means that if I'm doing my job the way I'm supposed to do it by the law and by policy, then I should be immune from civil liability. That to me is a no-brainer. It should be a no-brainer to everybody in the room. And that's one. Another one that I think is going to help is the tuition bill. The tuition bill that they're pushing through will provide tuition to certified law enforcement officers in good standing, that their kids can go to college. That's a huge burden for a police officer. I'll be honest with you, my daughter graduated from Jacksonville State University 8 years ago, and I'm still at the very end of paying her tuition off. So that's going to help law enforcement tremendously. That's going to help with the recruiting. The police officer impersonation bill. If you impersonate a peace officer in the state of Alabama under this, it'll be a Class C felony. If you're an administrator, if you're a chief of police or a sheriff, and you hire someone who has been suspended or revoked by the commission to be a police officer, and you knowingly hire him, you're subject to a Class C felony. That's going to stop law enforcement officers who are no longer certified from being out on the street doing stupid things. So that's a good bill. And there's many others in there. I could go on for an hour, but those are the big ones that really need to get through, that will help us tremendously in the recruiting part of it. Because when we hold recruiting fairs, one of the first things that officers say, or people who want to be police officers, young kids, 19, 20, 21, 22 years old, they want to know what's going to happen if they get put on YouTube for 10 seconds and end up on World News Tonight in 24-hour headline news. Am I going to lose everything I have? Am I going to lose my job, my profession, everything? So you have to explain those things to them. And that's going to help us with the recruiting part of it.
And when they have that thought process, it may cost them their life when they hesitate like that, because they're seeing what's on TV, and so that could help us. On the college thing, I'm 62 with 2 19-year-old daughters, so God has a sense of humor with that. So, but they're both in college right now, and I thought I was prepared for it, and I was like, oh my goodness, y'all have lost your mind on these. On these college prices. So anything like that can help in that area, it's much needed.
Qualified immunity should have been corrected 20 years ago. This has taken way too long to address, and it's had a negative impact long-term in our profession for decades now. We've got lawsuits that I classify them or call them nuisance lawsuits. I've got one in particular that I'm dealing with that goes back to 2017 on a misdemeanor arrest, and the civil component is still ongoing. It's 8 years old, it's frivolous, and it's affected every officer who's named in the lawsuit when they go to buy a house, refinance their house. Every aspect or more aspects of their life than you realize are affected by being a defendant in frivolous civil action. Now, there's no merit to the case that I'm talking about. It's judiciously wasteful. There's no reason for this lawsuit to exist. I've been the victim of that in my career. I'm sure y'all have also. And it's just interesting when you consider yourself, your name should be defendant sometimes, and it's on a lawsuit that carries on for years over nothing. Nothing at all, and we're still dealing with that today. Qualified immunity should have been corrected decades ago. The scholarship component of the proposed law is great. We're constantly looking at how to add premium pay incentives to our officers, and college degrees is the simplest way to do that. My employees work through the Jefferson County Personnel Board, and we recognize associate degree, bachelor's degrees, and so forth. And we encourage everybody to get their degrees because it's the quickest way to get a pay raise, and that pay raise stays with them throughout their career. I wish we could have done this a long time ago to help some of my officers that needed to finish a degree and attain the pay premiums that go along with that. Scholarship for our children is great. I can't relate to what Chief Wilson's going through with two in college right now. My only child went through the Marine Corps to pay for his college. So I've been blessed with that. So maybe we should have sent yours to the Marine Corps too. Any other comments?
I would just say, talk about the frivolous civil suits. I know an officer who was involved in a officer-involved shooting in 2001, and he was completely justified in what he did. It was a complete legitimate shoot. It was cleared. He was cleared almost immediately because of the situation, but the civil suit came forward, and he stayed tied up in a civil suit for 10 years. Now imagine living 10 years as a law enforcement officer with this civil suit hanging over your head. We've got to stop that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, and thank you for sharing your concerns and your thoughts with that. And I assure you, I've known each one of these gentlemen for many, many years, and there's about 300 of their counterparts just across the hall here at their annual winter conference. The vast majority of law enforcement officers, whether they be chiefs or whether they be officers, they are not looking for bad officers to get away with bad situations. They want to hold officers accountable, and that's not what any of this legislation is intended to stop. So if you hear that moving forward, check it out. Talk to your own people. Look at the legislation, because good officers want one thing, and that's another good officer serving with them. So, having said that, there's a few other bills that I just ask you to touch on briefly as we kind of move toward the close. There is a bill that will establish a penalty for failure to disclose possession of a firearm to law enforcement.
That's correct. This bill would be, say, for instance, a police officer's on a traffic stop at 2:30 in the morning, his backup's 30 minutes away, and he walks up to the car and he starts to ask the driver for his driver's license. It would make that person have to tell the officer that there is a weapon on him or in the vehicle. That way he knows it right off the bat, and that's basically the bones of that bill.
And I believe this is actually an amendment to a bill that was passed maybe 2013 whenever the pistol permit requirement went away. And the law required that individual to disclose that information to a law enforcement officer, but there was no penalty written into the law if they didn't. And so this is trying to correct that.
It basically cleans that bill up and puts a penalty phase to it.
Then there's also some other bills that address felons in possession of firearms, and it expands that legislation to cover more individuals that may be convicted of felons. I'm not sure if you know the specifics of
I don't
that.
know the specifics of it. I've just heard about it this morning. The biggest thing that we need to get changed quickly is the Glock switch bill, so we will have some teeth to be able to arrest juveniles and hold them accountable for those types of violent crimes. As of right now, we can't take those to federal court. We have to try to do something here in state, but right now they're not illegal, so therefore we can't charge them federally and we can't charge them under a state crime.
And one thing specifically that this legislation I just mentioned will do is it establishes a new felony offense that prohibits a person from possessing a firearm while they're out on bail awaiting trial for certain offenses. Currently, if they don't have a prior felony conviction under the law, they could still carry a firearm unless ordered otherwise by the court. Well, this will make it a separate crime in and of itself. If they're out on bail for certain offenses, they can no longer possess a firearm, and that would be a separate charge as well. There's also been a lot of discussion, and I know this is something that's close to the heart of all three of these individuals, and they've had a lot of dealings with this over the past few years, but there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of legislation proposed about the release of body cam video. If you would maybe touch on that a little bit and help our audience understand the benefits of not addressing it the way this legislation does.
The legislation currently in the House makes it where we have to immediately release body camera footage. I'm not against releasing body camera footage. I am against the fact that if it's an ongoing criminal investigation, they don't need the camera footage, number one, until that's over. Number two, we have to think about other things. We have to think about HIPAA. What if there's somebody there that has a medical condition or being treated for a medical condition? We have HIPAA laws. We have juveniles who could be inside the video. These things have to be redacted. That costs money. That takes time. This bill is a terrible bill, and we're vehemently opposed to it. But we can sit down at the table and work something out to figure out the best practices in releasing body cam footage. But the way it's written now is a terrible bill. And just say, for instance, an officer went to a house where 2 kids were shot, and the officer ended up having to shoot the shooter. This bill would require them within 48 hours to release this video. That's not right. It's going to hinder the criminal prosecution part of it. It's going to show the faces of the juveniles that were involved. We need to sit down and work this out. It can be worked out, but this bill is not doable to us.
And it is not body cam cover-up. This is caught on tape. It's going to eventually come out. That's a fact. But it's got to be orderly and not how it's been presented in this bill.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. And obviously, as these bills move forward, they're going to change. There's always revisions. There's always amendments and substitutes. So don't just get too comfortable reading a bill as it's dropped initially, because it will change through the process, and you need to stay informed with that as well, because sometimes a good bill can turn bad in a hurry. Not to say that that's necessarily done on purpose, but there's sometimes unintended consequences that result. So please try to stay informed with these bills as they move forward. And having said that, I think we're almost out of time. So I want to close our discussion, but I want to obviously thank our panel for coming today and spending time with you and sharing their thoughts and hopefully giving you some things that you can consider, carry back to your own communities and take part within your own police agencies and within your own elected governing bodies and your public safety personnel. I would encourage you to continue to work and strive toward the goals that they set out here today. I would also pass on to you that many of you that are here that have police departments, your police chief is probably in attendance here today in the conference center. And so I would encourage you to reach out to them and whether it be today or sometime after today is over and their conference is over, but sit down and have some conversations about what you've heard today and your own thoughts about that. I assure you that they will welcome that opportunity and welcome the opportunity to share with you their concerns. And even as Chief Partridge said, also engage with some of the line personnel that are out there. Those are the men and women that go out there each and every day trying to serve your communities, and sometimes they do feel like they're not being heard, whether it's on a local level or some other level. So take that opportunity and do that as well. Any last comments from our panel?
If we can ever help you in any way or answer a question, if we don't know the answer, we'll find the answer, but we're certainly available to do that for you.